How do you make a job in a fictional world believable? All this and more in tonight's episode. Welcome, friends. My name is Tikito, and I will be your host for this fine evening. This is Tikito's Emporium, a channel where we focus on world building, implementing better narratives into our D&D adventures, and immersion building. If that sounds like your kind of a jam and something you want to learn about, then pull up a chair, sit down, and let's have a conversation. Today I'm going to share with you my process and methodology of creating believable jobs within fictional fantasy worlds that I create for my D&D settings and campaigns. Sometimes I also do this for short stories that I write, but none of them are published, so it doesn't fucking matter. The point is, I have a very particular method and process of creating something that feels like an organic, natural extension of that universe and that is believable when you look at it. I don't want players to suspend their disbelief when they are presented certain NPCs with certain jobs and roles, or when they are told that they could potentially have a background that says they had that particular job. I want it to seem normal and obvious and really cool. In this video, I'm going to take you through my formula of how to create believable jobs, each step in the process of how I do that and why each step is significant. We're then going to take one job and deconstruct it from real life and see how these steps apply to it and how they prove that it is a believable job. And then we're going to create a fictional job, and then we're going to take another fictional job from a different setting and a different universe that somebody has created, and we're going to analyze how this writer made that actually seem very believable and grounded. The key thing I want you all to remember when thinking about anything you want to seem believable, whether they be character actions, world building, settings, factions, beliefs, cultures, jobs, technology, or whatever, it always has to seem like a natural, believable, and logical extension of that universe and reality. That's literally the key paragraph or sentence for anything that needs to seem believable. It needs to follow a certain logic that is obvious to anybody who backwards reasons its existence. If you can achieve that, and you won't necessarily always be able to achieve that to the extent that you desire, if you can achieve that most of the time, you have on your hands a very immersive and logical world. Now, you may ask, why does making immersive worlds matter? Why should we bother making immersive jobs and yada, yada, yada? There is one very detailed and logical explanation for these kinds of things. So let's get into that first before we move on to everything else. If you're a player that is into roleplay, then chances are that you want to experience and interact with the world through the vessel of your character. You want to feel as if you're there and you're engrossed in that experience. Now, when you do things like that and your DM enchants and depicts the world for you, you start judging the world and its behavior and what you encounter on it based on the rules which are implicit and explicit that are defined by that world itself. Of course, through the mouth of your DM, really. Whenever you encounter something that doesn't seem to follow these implicit and explicit rules of that universe, it seems completely out of place, dropped in there, it doesn't make sense, and it is very obviously the hand of the DM or the writer that is putting it there, you are pulled out of the immersion. Your secondary belief is destroyed. You no longer believe in the verisimilitude of that world. It is no longer believable. And in that moment, your immersion is shattered, and you enjoy the game just a little bit less. The point is, us as DMs, the less often we can do that to people that are really into immersion, and if we're into creating immersive worlds ourselves, the more enjoyable and engrossing the game and the world will be. The more powerful the enchantment you create will be. And if you're into that sort of stuff and into role-playing, then that's your shit, and it's the best thing you could do. We probably will never be able to do it flawlessly, but the less often we can do it, the more enjoyable the game is. Alrighty then, so what is my formula and process for making a job seem believable? First things first, for a job to exist, it must be able to provide value to a group within a society. That is one of the basic rules. Some value must be provided from one party to another. The method in which that value is provided must be within the bounds of the rules, both implicit and explicit, as defined by the universe itself. There's those implicit and explicit rules again. This is again something defined by the world as the players experience there, but for example, if you have levitation in a world that is freely available and a child can learn it in school, then you probably don't need aircraft, unless there's a very obvious reason why aircraft will be, necessary. Maybe levitation is a very expensive spell with complex components. Maybe there's like a whole class of people that cannot fly, but there is technology and development in that level of that universe that airplanes seem likely. Stuff like that. People will question shit like that, and this is how you can think what informs what kind of a job and how a certain problem is solved. Now that we're talking about problem solving, the third rule I use is that the value provided must solve a pertinent problem, satisfy a need or a want, or satisfy some kind of a job for the group that is receiving this value. It must do that. That's basically most things in the world and most products in the world and services. That's what they do. One extra thing I want to say about want and need is that there is a specific difference between the two. They're not actually interchangeable whatsoever. So a good example of a want or a need would be, a need is something fundamental and necessary, almost something that you cannot avoid wanting. That's why it's a need, essentially. You need to eat in order to survive. You need to sleep. You need to breathe air. You need shelter if the weather outside will kill you. How do you contrast that to a want, hey? So let's take food. You need to eat in order to survive. You need sustenance. You need food and water. A piece of bread, a loaf of bread would satisfy that, or a wide enough diet of fruits and berries and vegetables. But what if you fucking hate fruits, berries, and vegetables? Maybe you prefer a nice little Napolitana pizza. Well, in that case, you want the pizza. You don't need the pizza to survive. You could just as easily survive off anything else, but you want the pizza, just like you want certain junk food that is bad for you because you don't actually need it to survive. In some cases, it may actually be detrimental to your survival, but that's a different story. So that is one good example of a want and a need. You need shelter, but you perhaps want a palace instead of a modest dwelling. And loads of jobs and services bounce off of that kind of a thing. Of a want. I mean, how many restaurants you see serving decadent, luxuriant food? You don't need it. Nobody needs that, but they want it. And therefore, there is a want that needs to be satisfied. Somebody satisfies it, they get compensated for it, and off they go living their jolly life. I just wanted to clarify that because sometimes people can get confused between the difference between a want and a need. The fourth rule I use is that providing this value must be worth doing for the value provider. They must either get some kind of financial support of it, they live off of it, they get a kick out of it if it's a purely charitable act. There must be something that they get in return for this. And of course, as a bonus to that rule, if they are not fully supported financially and able to survive by doing this kind of a job or occupation, there must be a logical explanation to how else they are surviving. So for example, if this job or occupation takes up 12 hours of somebody's day every day, and it doesn't, within the rules of your world, give them enough food or money to get enough food to live somewhere or just survive, then how do you explain them surviving? You have to have an explanation. So maybe it's a part-time thing. Maybe they have free lodging somewhere or something like that. There has to be an explanation if it does not provide for their sustenance. As far as I'm concerned, if none of these things are ticked within a description or definition of an occupation or job or service, then it shouldn't exist. It can easily be reasoned back and dissected and broken down and realize that this makes no fucking sense. So you don't want that. Nobody wants that. Let's just move on. These are my rules. I'll have them in the description if you guys need a recap, or probably as a downloadable PDF. I'll figure that out. Now we're going to go into examples. That's the process. That's what I use. And now we're going to go into the examples and actually see how these rules apply to existing stuff, to well-written fictional fantastical jobs, and one that we will create ourselves. First things first, we're going to take one from real ancient history. Well, medieval history, essentially. We're going to take blacksmithing. Everybody knows blacksmithing. I didn't want to take anything obscure or crazy like royal butt wiper or some shit like that. Blacksmithing is pretty straightforward. It's been around for a very, very long time, ever since we knew how to basically fiddle with metal and make shit. Fiddle. Fiddle is the official and technical term. Do not forget it, boy. You can take any period you like, although if we're talking D&D, D&D is really kind of emulating late Renaissance, I think, if I'm getting my periods right, since that level of metallurgy to create full plate that knights wear, that's like, I think, 17th or 18th century shit. Don't quote me on it, but I know it's very late. But let's say you take a very, very good and advanced blacksmith. Now, blacksmithing became available because we learned to create the tools and methods of extracting certain metals from rock that we mined, and then smelting it down and putting it into crucibles and various kind of stuff. I'm not an expert on the profession, of course, and creating things out of it. Why did it exist? What was the value it provided? So first things first, what is the value blacksmithing provides to a group or provided to a group within a society? We still have blacksmithing today, but let's not talk about modern blacksmithing. The value provided most of the time is tools were made. Sometimes these were implements of murder, which is what most people are interested in. And sometimes, and most of the time, probably more commonly, they were implements of just general day-to-day life jobs and chores. You know, people would make horseshoes, for example. They would probably make other kinds of tools that people used in their homes. I mean, they definitely made other kinds of tools. They may even make hinges out of iron, all kinds of shit. This all had to be done by somebody who could shape and mold metal. These were real needs that needed to be satisfied. You had a particular type of job you needed to do. A tool could be made to accommodate for you to do that job. Therefore, somebody became the service person that created these tools and sold them to you for a particular amount of money or a trade or something like that. You got weapons, you need to defend yourself, you need to fight the enemy army. Somebody needs to make those spear shafts. Well, you got blacksmiths, they make the spear shafts, they make the helmets to protect you from the arrows and the fucking hammer and sword blows. These were all real problems that needed to be solved. And there was a real job that came out of it based on the technology that emerged within the period and that got refined over time. This is basically how it works. So the first thing is that is the value provided. People need tools, whether they're for combat or general day-to-day use or farm use or any kind of stuff like that. There is a profession that makes those tools. It satisfies a want or a need. There is a need for a higher grade of tools. If you, again, let's go to spears. Very simple example. Before you were making spears out of just sharpened wood, or you would put stone that you sharpen on top of it. Now you can make something out of metal, which is sturdier, it's tougher. You can mold it and fit it better to a shaft, and you can go stab things you want to stab much better and easier. So there was always a need and a want for better stabbing ability and stabbing in general. Profession emerges based on a new technology that emerged within humanity, and it can provide superior stabbing ability. All of a sudden, you can do that much better. Again, with axe heads and other tools, like, again, axe heads for chopping wood. Before you chopped wood with stone, now you're chopping it with metal. Much better. There is a need and a want for better quality of implement, and that is provided by this profession. The third one is the value provided must be provided within the rules, both implicit and explicit, of that universe. We're talking about our own world, our own existence. It was logical that once people figured out how to extract metal from stone and ore, and they learned how to smelt it and shape it into stuff, it's very logical that they would use that technology and methodology to create these tools and implements and give rise to that kind of a profession. It just makes sense. If, for example, you had a universe where nobody figured out how to extract metal from ore, but all of a sudden you have metallic weapons and you have no other explanation where these metallic implements are fucking coming from, then it makes no sense for that job to exist. Now we got into the fourth path, it must be worth doing it for them. Somebody was a blacksmith would receive all kinds of things in return for the service. Gold, trade, reputation, renown, services, dependence, which of course with itself comes with other kinds of things that are of value. People able to do it as a full-time profession, pass it on to the children, so forth and so on. Again, it depends across the time period and where you're at, but if it wasn't worth doing and people couldn't live well off of it or live off it at all, they just wouldn't do it. So it's very obvious how this profession that we're all familiar with, you know, historically, and we are familiar with it within our games and our settings in D&D, it's very obvious how it ticks all these boxes and it can exist. Now, things get tricky when you start coming up with really fantastical shit and you want to justify its existence. And this is where we're going to use the formula and the steps again to just go through it and make it believable. Now, there's one very common and interesting theme I want you all to notice about jobs and services that people provide. Namely, there are often services and jobs that emerge within the only world we know, Earth and our human society. They're often fueled by an advancement in technology or knowledge of some type. Blacksmithing is a good example of it, but obviously there's other stuff. You know, if you take software engineers today, rise of computers into particular type of tools enabled for us to do that, but also type of products we offer and create for each other and distribute across the world are only capable and possible because of the tools we created. If you're making apps now, you couldn't make apps 50 years ago because there wasn't a platform or a technology or sufficient advancement within what we've got to make that possible. Same with blacksmithing, same with fucking rocket science, right? When thinking about your fantastical worlds, you have other things available rather than just technology. You have, technology is just a tool, right? You have magic, which also is basically, you know, magical technology or a magical tool. And so certain types of magic that you say exist in your world can give rise to actual job. So that's the kind of example I'm using for my made-up example. Now we're gonna get into the actual made-up job, and we're gonna go through these rules and the process I go through, and we're gonna make it seem believable. So the kind of magic I'm talking about here in this setting for the example I'm going to use to create a fictional job is, in this fantasy universe, let's just call it Fantasy Universe A 50369C. So in this fantasy universe, we have magic called wood weaving. I'm calling it motherfucking wood weaving. So somebody is able to sing if they know the kind of song and magic that they channel through their singing and vibration, and they're able to weave trees around them. And over a period of, let's say, a couple of days, they accelerate the growth of the tree in the direction and shape that they want. And this allows them to build structures and objects that they can then cut off out of the tree, or literally grow an entire house or dome or something out of it and create structures. We're going to call this kind of magic wood weaving, and we're going to call the kind of people that are able to do it wood singers. Sounds nice and fantastical. You can even imagine elves doing it, right? Now we're going to take two slightly different settings with the same type of magic that I'm going to create right now on the spot out of my head. I'm just joking, I had this pre-prepped. Gonna make it out of my head, and we're going to see how these kind of jobs behave in it. So in the first setting, let's say it's a hardcore industrial capitalist setting, and there's this island of, they can be humans, and they have certain mages that have been trained throughout the years, or druids seem more likely, that are able to sing the songs to the trees and make them weave into certain shapes. Now, we live in a really competitive and trade-like world, let's say like the age of sail in human times, and ships and boats are in high demand for war and for trade and for traversing vast, humongous oceans within this fantastical universe. Now, this island is incredibly wealthy because it is able to provide really well put together boats that are not made out of planks of wood. They're grown out of trees over a period of a month by multiple wood weavers, right? So this nation that has these wood weavers, the only one that has that magic and trains it, is able to fetch high prices for really powerful and well-built boats that are better than conventionally tool-made boats because of this woven wood, because it's more integral and like well-packed and shit like that, doesn't break as easy, and they can produce high quantities of it very fast because they can sing it out of the wood. So this nation, all of a sudden, becomes the premier ship seller to the known world, to various powerful nations that have to fuel their merchants and navies, and they're able to command high prices for this premium craft, right? As in a vessel. I'm talking about a vessel instead of the job. So all of a sudden, this nation has a high interest in training its people, or training a certain class of people that are able to do this job, and they get compensated very heavily since they're an integral part to maintaining the nation's economic wealth and dominance, and again, neutrality, let's say. I'm expanding the story here. They're able to claim neutrality because everybody's so dependent on their merchandise, right? Beautiful. So all of a sudden, we have this job called wood weaving, and we have these generations of wood weavers which are risen and may be trained in like small schools or groves or something. You can make it a really naturey people. And they're very important to their society because they're able to keep it economically stable and politically neutral. So that's how you make a fantastical job work. And we're gonna now go through the formula and see why it works, right? There's a want or a need that needs to be satisfied to a particular group. There are people across the world who need high quality ships to sail. Their ships that they make with their hands and regular tools, they break down and they have certain issues, right? Like ships always did. But all of a sudden, there's a higher quality of boat that can be made and sold by certain people that can give them a competitive advantage in sailing, resisting pirates, or just winning combat against adversaries on the open seas. Boom, that is a need and a want and a job actually that needs to be satisfied. It's being satisfied by the creation of this craft. Is the job or the service provided being provided within the rules of the world as defined explicitly and implicitly? Yes, it is. We have defined that we have a type of magic called wood weaving. Wood weaving. I mean, I made up the fucking job. You think I could say it properly. We have defined that we have a type of magic called wood weaving within this universe. It is defined as an explicit rule of it. Therefore, it makes sense that these kinds of things can exist within the bounds and the mechanism of this magic as we have defined it. period. Is it worth doing for the people doing it? Yes, it's worth for the nation to do it. It's worth for them to train the people, and for the individuals it's worth doing because they may enjoy it, but also they're very well compensated by their government or their nation or their rulers. I would say definitely financially, but you can have different kind of a economy working within a crazy fucking island nation that fucking weaves trees, right? But they're very well compensated and they're held in high esteem. Done. Very easy for them to exist. Another secondary idea that you can think of the top of your head, if you're taking like elves, because when you think wood weaving, you think elves, right? Different setting 50C 59 beta or B, whatever. Take different setting. In it, let's say there's no money or no currency. This is like an elven nation and they can wood weave, and they wood weave for free homes for other elves because they live for thousands of years, let's say. They have no need for currency and they have a very utopian society, let's say. Like, you know, whatever your idea of utopia is, but you know, like a typical elven stuff. Elves probably don't trade amongst each other because they have everything, right? They're the greatest. So let's say they're able to do that. And what they get out of it is they're just providing this service and a trade perhaps between different craftspeople for the service they provide. Now this ticks all the same boxes as before, but this time it's only worth doing for them, not because they're able to survive of it, because it's a utopian society where everybody gets to survive automatically, but because they enjoy it and because it is a gift and they receive gifts in return, like a favor for a favor. That is another way of running this. The third and final example is an example from an existing fictional universe. We're going to see how this author created a believable and grounded job that seems like a natural extension of that reality. And we're going to see how that job ticks all of the boxes within my own process in order to achieve that. The setting we're going to use is Geralt of Rivia. That's not a setting, that's the character's name that everybody knows. We're going to use the Witcher setting, and we're going to use the Witcher profession because I think that is a perfect example of a very well thought through and reasoned and grounded job that again seems like a natural extension of a reality based on the rules defined implicit and explicit that I forgot the author's name that he created. It's very well done, and we're going to go through it and see how it actually works and why it actually seems very well grounded. If you watch a Netflix series, it doesn't necessarily give you enough world information to actually see exactly how grounded The Witcher as a profession is. There's a little bit, but if you play the game, for example, or read the books, there's loads in there, and you can see how well reasoned it is. So let's start breaking this job down. We're going to go with the first step. The job, profession, occupation, The Witcher in this case, must provide value to a group of people within a society. Now, it's very obvious how it provides value, but I want to dive a bit into the backstory and lore behind the Witcher universe to explain how this need was created by the events and how basically the author is creating really good foundation and groundwork for the existence of this job. I think it's important because there's a lot of inspiration and good pointers you can take from something like that. In the Witcher universe, there was this event called the Conjunction of Spheres, which resulted in two different universes or worlds merging together to some extent and different things passing between the two of them, which resulted in, I don't exactly remember, but I think the humans went from their world into the elven world and vice versa, but it resulted in vast human populations that resemble a feudal medieval era type civilizations entering and finding themselves in a world that is populated by monstrosities, a world that has magic, and where various creatures from folklore, as we would know it, especially Slavic folklore, are alive and they're there and they are having a very real and detrimental impact onto the lives of these people. So now all of a sudden you have this very significant problem you need to solve, which is that your populace is beset by various kinds of monsters and monstrosities that are not necessarily always easily taken care of by raw brawn and fielded armies. Now, of course, if you got an infestation of neckers or drowners or some shit like that, like for example in the game, sure, a local lord could field an army and just call them out because it's not difficult to track these things down. But if you have more complicated things like specters or curses or vampires that are elusive and deceitful and difficult to find, or even werewolves that are difficult to track, an army won't necessarily be able to do that. No matter how powerful a lord you are, you may not have the people or the skill in order to track down such elusive prey that may be fucking up your populace or causing real problems. Perhaps, and again, in The Witcher, you see that these problems do not just beset the peasantry, which needs to provide the food and slave away for the lords. It also besets people in higher positions of power, like curses and various kinds of things. And these things need to be resolved by a specialist, essentially. And who would this specialist be? Since there is this kind of a need within the population to solve these monster problems on a daily or regular basis within various regions of various different types, there has to be somebody who's willing to do this. and now they would have been historically people are willing to do it, but they would have found themselves coming up short when trying to test their mettle against these kinds of creatures, and therefore they had to augment their ability to do that. And the witches are born by creating concoctions and going through a mutation process that most children die through, and then going through rigorous training and education. They become monster hunters that roam the world and give out the services for money, never really belong in either world. Not really monster, not really man. That's actually the first rule, how it's ticked. Very long ramble about it, but I think it's a very significant ground setting for that. I just want to point out that within the first rule, the need is very obvious. People are dying a lot, way more than they would have died in regular medieval times from all these monstrosities that are very difficult to combat and are elusive in nature. Some of them, of course, are elusive and some of them are not. You need specialists that know how to deal with this shit, because even your local enforcement won't necessarily know what to do. This easily comes into the second, so I've kind of covered both step 1 and 2, which is there is a task, a job, or a need and a want that is being satisfied. There is a need to survive. The job is destroy the things that are killing us or plaguing us, lift my curse, save my transformed specter-like dead daughter, shit like that. Needs to be solved, need a specialist, they're gonna do it. Very simple, I won't ramble anymore about that. Now, third, the method in which the value is provided must be within the bounds of the universe, both spoken and unspoken. Now we have defined a universe where there is magic, where there is the ability to mutate, where there are curses, and all of a sudden that is how the witches actually provide this value. They augment themselves through the mutation process that they go through. They train, they're good swordsmen, they're cunning, they have strategies, they have traps, they have poisons, they have whatever they need to deal with these monsters. They are educated on them, so there is a history of people that have lived and died fighting these various types of creatures, and they're educated on them, so that's how they provide this value, through this kind of skill set that they have developed, and they have some very minor grasp of basic fundamental magic, which is defined to exist within this universe. They're not sorcerers, but they know a little bit. Very well reasoned, very well defined. The witches aren't just fucking pulling out spectral blades out their ass and growing wings and flying down to these monsters, when nowhere in this universe was it defined that you can do that. Because this world mostly resembles medieval Europe and has elements of magic and folklore interspersed into it, it is very easy for the author to make the witches be very grounded and believable by giving them various tools that people in medieval times would use anyways to combat various types of threats, and then sprinkle in the fantastical elements whose rules you have defined rather well, or at least you have presented them consistently and faithfully. Now, I haven't fully read all the books, so I can't say that he's always done that, but if you're playing the game, it's very consistent and believable to see how this shit is executed, essentially. On to the fourth step, sufficient motivation. The job though must have sufficient motivation to do this. Sufficient motivation, of course, would be altruism, but witches live off of the work they do. This is obviously very well defined, and it's what they do, and some of the bias and prejudice against them is created out of that, of course. So we're all very familiar with that. They get paid for it, they do it, they get to travel around, they get bored, as in bored, they get to stay in places. That's it. They might have altruistic motives, although, of course, the whole idea, and this is good writing when you actually put drama into it. This is a little bonus section. When you put drama into it, when a person is at odds with the duality of the life they have chosen. On one hand, they're choosing to protect people, but most of the time, the very people they protect resent them. Now, this was very well baked into the co-conflict of the Witcher as a personality, or Geralt. That's good story writing. If you want a tip, do something like that. Sufficient motivation, very clear and very obvious. So that's The Witcher, essentially. If you understand how the lore and everything has built it up, you can see actually how this kind of a profession just springs out of it. Because if you were the author, you could say, yeah, I want this world where these two worlds have merged, and all of a sudden you have folklore-like monsters within a regular medieval European setting, and then we have some kind of sorcery and magic, and people are run by many of these creatures, and they're plagued by curses and diseases and forest creatures that infuse themselves in their souls. I think that's what that dryad-like looking thing did. Then you think like, well, how do people deal with this? And then you say, well, they field armies, for example. All the peasants organize a militia. But then you say to yourself, oh no, I've actually made it so these monsters are really difficult to kill, and they can just maul a regular man or woman to death like that. And then you say, oh no, I've actually made them even harder to kill. They can maul a trained soldier to death just like that. And then you say, well, okay, but you know, the Lord's like, we know we get fucking 20, 30 armed infantrymen, and we charge the location of the monster nest. But then you say, oh, but I've defined some of these monsters to be extremely elusive and really difficult to track. They can shapeshift into humans, they can vanish into mist, really difficult. And these guys are not so sorcerers. And then you also say, well, I've defined sorcerers to be also difficult to find and hard to train. And then eventually you would most likely come to the conclusion of creating something like The Witcher. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is the process the author went through. He might have conceived of The Witcher first and then backwards reasoned the entire world. I don't know. I haven't watched interviews when he actually talks about what he did. But you can do it like that. And you can see how it organically arises. You're like, okay, well, there should be an order of hunters that track down and kill these creatures, but they must be augmented, powerful enough and have good enough senses and abilities to track them down and deal with them and have an extensive knowledge of what to do. And bam, you got The Witcher. That's The Witcher, everyone. I think The Witcher universe, especially if you play the game, which most people have, provides some of the best RPG storytelling and world building that a person can learn a lot for tabletop role-playing games. Like a shit ton. The thing, obviously, with tabletop role-playing games, you always have more choice, but the narrative baked into the emotional punch that you have within characters and the world baked into The Witcher is actually incredible. And I might do more videos about that in the future. But that was it. That's the video. This is my process for making jobs appear believable when I'm world building for my D&D campaigns and writing short stories. If you have any additional questions or something's not clear about what I've said here, which is very plausible, let's be honest, I talk a lot, you can post a question in the comments. Hit me up. Hit me up, son. Until next time, please subscribe. If you are into improving how you build your worlds, improving the kind of narrative and character depth you put into your D&D campaigns, and want to create more compelling narratives for your players to gobble up as they exercise their free choice. Remember, no railroading here. Then this is the channel for you. I feel that this is a topic that isn't covered enough within the D&D community, at least not vocal enough in my opinion. And this is kind of stuff I'm passionate about. And I want to fill that gap. So if that's what you're interested in, subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode.